This is Gruinard Island, measuring about 1 by 2 kilometres just off of the coast of Scotland. You can go there today, but back before 1990 it was contained within a quarantine zone. Spending any amount of time there whatsoever would result in your death by anthrax just days later. But how did a whole island become contaminated with anthrax spores? How did they get there? Well, the story begins back in World War II. The Second World War began in 1939, and as we know today the Allies won by 1945, but there was a point where things were looking bleak. The Allies were on the back foot, and there wasn't much Churchill and his staff wouldn't consider if it meant victory over Hitler and Germany. He would even go as far as biological warfare, something later banned in 1975 after the Biological Weapons Convention. So, the decision was made to develop a biological weapon so powerful it would cripple German food production. The mission was to be kept top secret and was named Operation Vegetarian. Prime Minister Winston Churchill turned to a man called Dr. Paul Fields. Fields was working at Porton Down, a top-secret military research facility, as director of the biology department. Churchill tasked Fields with developing a biological weapon capable of turning the tide of the war and forcing a swift surrender from the Germans. The weapons were prototyped and were soon ready to be tested before their deployment over the cattle fields of Germany. But what were they? Operation Vegetarian was a plan to drop linseed cakes laced with anthrax spores over the fields of rural Germany. These would then be eaten by cattle, who would then die of anthrax just days later, crippling the German food production and starving Hitler and the Germans into an early surrender. 5 million cakes were made, and the plan was coming along fast. The UK government needed a testing ground, and they settled on Gruinard Island, owned privately in Scotland. They took control of the island, offering the owners the chance to buy it back after the test for £500. The test that took place, however, would render the island uninhabitable until 1990, after a 4-year programme of formaldehyde spraying. A virulent strain of anthrax was loaded into a bomb and detonated near a field of sheep. The test was a success. The sheep died in a matter of days. However, the scientists then realised something. That bomb not only spread the spores to the sheep, but over the entirety of the island. Gruinard Island was then swiftly quarantined and the sheep buried. But the impact was far wider than what the researchers imagined. One of the sheep corpses ended up in the sea and drifted all the way back to the Scottish mainland. A dog ate some of the sheep's corpse and contracted anthrax, and this spread, initially to more dogs, but then to cattle, pets, and the local wildlife. By the time the authorities were on top of the situation, over 100 local animals had died. But what is anthrax? Anthrax is the disease caused by the bacterium Bacillus anthracis. It can be grown aerobically or anaerobically, but most importantly, it produces endospores. These endospores are a hardy form of the cell that allows it to survive unfavourable conditions, waiting sometimes up to years in a kind of stasis for things to get better. In this state, it can resist heat, drying, and disinfectants. The aerosolized spores are what were used in the bioweapons developed by the British military. The bacteria itself doesn't kill you though. The bacteria produce a toxin made up of 3 proteins. The first is a cell-binding protein called the protective antigen, necessary for attachment of the protein complex onto cells. Then we have the lethal and edema toxins, and it is these that kill cells once the complex is endocytosed. Once inside cells, in an endosome, the enzymatic components of the toxin translocate into the cytoplasm. When here, they interfere with cell function and migration. They particularly mess with the immune system, allowing the bacteria to go unnoticed in the body. Once it's got a grip on you, there's little hope unless you receive antibiotics and antitoxins. Symptoms include cutaneous lesions, inflammation, flu-like symptoms, and even gastrointestinal symptoms from swallowing the spores. But worst of all is a rare complication of meningitis. A patient that dies of an anthrax meningitis characteristically has dark red meninges, shown in this rather gruesome picture here. Anthrax meningitis is almost always fatal, even if treatment is administered. Prior to the nuclear bomb, bioweapons were the most destructive thing mankind had in their wartime toolbox. Nothing else came close to the amount of killing power and long-lasting effects that these weapons could have. Thankfully, however, Churchill never did use his bioweapon. By the end of World War II, all 5 million linseed cakes were destroyed, as Churchill recognised the Germans were about to succumb to Allied forces. It's scary to imagine a world in which times were more desperate, or Churchill didn't show such restraint. Hopefully, now we can live in a world in which we're no longer in fear of such things. Thank you for watching.